It is possible that every week is confusing, but it's also possible that all of a sudden at the end everything just comes together.
Yeah, I heard that. Bella said that, but I don't know.
She's
Well, we'll go over like any questions you have from last week. We'll even go through the slides again quickly, and then if you get to a point where you're like, that is the most confusing part, we could talk about it.
last week was the unemployment business cycle, right?
Yeah.
Last week was economic fluctuations. Chapter 10.
Narration number 10.
Thank you. Because this week, what the hell? Who am I yelling at? I don't know this person. No, someone stayed signed in. You know how I feel about that.
Wait, what?
No, I'm yelling at the computer.
Chill out,
I don't know. Everything's going.
I haven't done anything.
Oh, this week is not an easy week, to be honest with you guys.
Yeah, didn't look very fun.
Oh no. This isn't good. What is that noise?
Shut up. I don't know. It's annoying. How about turn this off?
It's on your computer?
Yeah. I keep getting new deals on Kia.
Have you been looking at cars?
Nope.
Let's see, chapter 10. Today, instead of teaching my middle schoolers, we took them to see the school play. We let them play outside, and then I gave them a presentation on the dogs that I know.
No.
It was a great day. But that means I actually have to teach now and get into that mindset. So let's see, where are we? I was just in this folder today.
Oh yeah, last week was the Aggregate. I remember. Wait, who told you it's confusing? We just remember from last week.
I have my sources.
Oh.
I have spies.
Was it?
Well, I did not put myself on blast like that, so.
Yeah, I don't remember telling you.
What are you talking about?
Last week.
Oh, did you just read the room?
You've been talking shit.
No, I did not read the
I did
room
not
because,
read the
well, I did read the room, but also I know it's Thursday, and on Thursdays at this time, you guys are all burnt out,
I've been up
which I
since
get.
6:50.
Huh?
I've been up since 6:50.
I've been up
It's a long
since
day.
5:45, so
You went.
yes.
Yeah, since
And I worked for 8 hours today, so I think where's my marker?
I felt bad for myself today.
But so, sometimes I get to see the glazed look in all of your faces, and I think, well, that's because it's Thursday and you're all tired. So,
Sorry.
yeah, that's fine. But also I know sometimes things are just confusing, and sometimes all it takes is like 3 sentences, and everyone goes, oh, that's what we missed. So like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we do have chapter 11 to look at, and I don't know if any of you looked at chapter 11. It is a very graph-heavy chapter, which I think is a lot of what is confusing to everybody. Let's see. I feel like this part we all got this, right? We're good on this. This is stuff we've been learning. You weren't here last week, right?
Yeah.
You were here or you weren't?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. But like, first slide should be pretty much common sense. This is all the stuff we know already. There's just more graphs that show that. We talked about how investment growth was more volatile than consumer growth, and you even said it's because people still have to buy things. You can't just not buy anything. You still need to buy food. Sometimes you need to replace clothing, things like that. Whereas an investment, if the interest rate goes up, businesses don't have to invest. They would like to, but if the interest rate's too high, it's just not worth it for them. We talked about Okun's law. Everyone kind of seems to get that. If unemployment increases, our GDP is going to go down. Bless you. I know that one was a little confusing just the way I worded it, but I think we resolved that issue early on. All right. We talked about our indicators. These I think it's the next like 2 slides or 3 slides. They're good to look at for that paper and presentation you all have to do. This is now like your 4th or 5th reminder. That is going to be due. You do have to write one of those. It is due like the last week. It's in the syllabus. But these slides is just quick descriptions on what each indicator was. I think
Wait, we have to write what?
a paper and do a presentation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This might have been where things started getting confusing. We talked about short run versus long run, right? What was the difference between short run and long run?
Short run won't change and long run will change.
That's
What was that?
Sticky and
Like in the short run, it's stickier.
What's sticky?
The prices won't
Yeah.
change.
But in the long run, prices will change. So we talked about, well, if the Fed reduces the money supply, in the short run, what's the effect going to be, right? And this is when we started drawing all of those graphs, and the graphs, I think, really got to everybody. So we have price, we'll have output. In the short run, this is short run, prices don't change. In the long run, prices will change. But also in the long run, it's weird, where like output will stay constant. So here, in the short run, output will change to adjust to prices. In the long run, prices will change to get back to our normal output. So we have prices and output. So in the short run, if the Fed reduces the money supply by 5%, we're going to see, so let's say we were here at Y1. Now the Fed just reduced the money supply by 5%. P is not going to change. It can't change in the short run. It's going to shift to, Y is going to go down, and now we'll produce Y2. So Y is normally a real variable. We would say nominal variables are the only things that change. But since our real variable will change in the short run. And then we did start talking about, does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of this that was confusing last week. And it was, the graphs were ugly, I'm not gonna lie. There were like a lot of graphs all layered on top of each other, and I apologize for that. But hopefully that makes a little bit more sense now. And then we touched on aggregate supply, aggregate demand. That I think we're good on, right? It's total demand in the economy, total supply in the economy. And we even went into it a little deeper here. So we went back to that classical dichotomy equation. MV equals PY, so money supply times the velocity of money equals the prices times the output. And we could move things around as we need, but we'll get that. If we write this in terms of real money balances, we get M over P, so money supply divided by prices, will equal the money supply divided by prices demanded, so the money, and that will equal K times Y, and K, all it means is 1 over V, so it's the same thing as Y over V. Right? So V, we always say is constant, we say it's fixed. M is fixed by the central bank, but there have been cases where the central bank can change M. But so, since that's the case, we're gonna have a negative relationship between P and Y. So as prices go up, we're gonna demand less. as prices go up, we demand less. So that's why we have this is demand. Downward sloping aggregate demand. And then we talked about, briefly, we touched on shifts in aggregate demand curve. So it'll tell us all about all the different possible combinations of prices and output given a fixed money supply. If the money supply changes, we have to have a new curve. So if the money supply decreases, this all has to decrease. Decrease in M. And then aggregate supply. So it's the relationship between the quantity of goods and services supplied at the given price. So we have short run and we have long run. Long run aggregate supply, short run aggregate supply. So this is the reason we said in the long run, prices will adjust, output won't. In the short run, output will adjust, prices won't. So that's why we have a horizontal line for short term. And just some reason we have that. But so in the short term, a reduction in the money supply will lead to a reduction in output. Okay. I don't know if this graph's on the next slide. This one. Let's see. Let's test it. I don't remember. No, case study. So what page is this on? Page 300. I don't know which one it is on your online thing. So I'm going to try to draw it, which was, I think, what got us last time, me trying to draw things. But I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to get rid of all of this. We're going to ignore it. It's not here. All right. So. We will have price level, output. We have our long run aggregate supply, and we have our short run aggregate supply. And we have aggregate demand. One. Okay. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to have a fall in aggregate demand. So this is going to shift to the left. So short run aggregate, aggregate demand 2. So we have this fall in aggregate demand. So that's the first thing that happens. So we move this way. Then, the second thing that's going to happen, so here we now have a lower output, right? But in the long run, what's going to happen is we're going to move along this aggregate demand 2 curve, and we're going to get, so we were at price 1, we're going to get to price 2. So prices are going to decrease, and we're going to go back to our normal output. This was a lot uglier last.
For some reason, yeah, this week it's easy.
I think it's just you've heard it now. So when I took all of my math classes here, I have a math degree, and every time I took a class, sitting in class, I was like, I don't get this. This makes no sense. I got a C+ in linear algebra because I could not get it.
Me too.
I'm done with linear algebra. I'm like, oh, I get it. Makes sense now. I don't know why. It's just like after the fact. Okay. So this also looks a lot less ugly. Makes, I think, things easier. All right. We didn't talk about the case study.
So moral of the story, it wants to get back to that equilibrium.
It always wants to get back to that output. We talked about stabilization policies. These shouldn't have been too bad. These are just things that happen that affect demand and supply. And I think that was pretty much the end of the chapter. Oh. Okay, this is just a different example, just like this. So we have short run aggregate supply, we have long run aggregate supply. So we're at equilibrium, we're at A. This is not in a great location, I realize that. But we're at A. And the first thing that happens is we have an adverse supply shock, and it shifts the short run aggregate supply curve upwards. Again, remember, price and output. So price has changed for some reason here. So we go up, and we wind up at output now 2. In the long run, we will get back to the short run aggregate supply. In the long run, we'll move along here. We'll get back to our output. Okay, kind of.
Wait, so why is it short run?
We just had like a supply shock that happened. And that caused our prices to go up. But we have to get back to this output in the long run. We'll always get back to that long run aggregate supply. So prices may stay the same here, but then output will increase eventually. Or maybe that shock will go away and we'll move back along this aggregate demand curve and we'll get back to that equilibrium. And this, I think, is the last slide. We talked about stagflation and how the Fed really has 2 options, which is either hold aggregate demand steady for battling stagflation. So hold aggregate demand steady, which will lead to an eventual fall in prices due to a decrease in output and employment, or expand aggregate demand and bring the levels closer to normal. But then prices are going to be kept artificially high, and there's no way to increase employment and keep prices low. Good now? Better? Ish? And I know that was like a crash course for you because you weren't here last week, but.
It was fun.
Alright. Chapter 11. Alright.
How many chapters are there that we did?
We have one more chapter. So my phone is up there and my clock is covered. So keep an eye on the time for me, guys. Because it turns out I have no concept of time. So just give me like a 10-minute warning if I'm getting there. We end at what, 4:20 or 5:20? Yeah. All right, so this is just a little quote that I must have taken from the book, or I took from somewhere. So the Great Depression changed the rules of economics. Oh no, this is definitely from the intro. Up until then, classicalists controlled the economy. Then came Keynes with the general theory of employment, interest, and money. So he believed that low aggregate demand was responsible for the depression. So the ISLM model is the leading interpretation of the general theory. So the IS curve is going to stand for investment savings, and LM is going to stand for liquidity money, and that's going to represent the demand for money essentially. There was something I just thought I had to tell you guys. I was reading an article, fake, like BuzzFeed or Fox News article, and someone spelled canceled with 1 L, which is the proper spelling of canceled, but Fox News or BuzzFeed put sick after it, meaning the person they quoted spelled it wrong, and I was like, no, but they spelled it correctly, so just thought that was funny.
The canceled with 1 L?
Yeah, canceled is spelled with 1 L. But most people spell it with 2. So like it's generally accepted, but it's really with 1 L, just so you guys all know. So I'm gonna get rid of this. We're done with this now.
It looks weird with one.
It does look weird one out.
Oh, he's written back out.
All right. So essentially, the short run in the economy is determined by spending plans of households, businesses, and governments. So the more people spend, the more firms can sell, and the more output they will produce and choose to hire, essentially. Interestingly enough, so when I was a TA up in Binghamton, this chapter was covered in Macro 1 during like week 3. So it wasn't this chapter exactly, they used a different textbook, but this concept was covered very early on. So what we're gonna have is, like I said, there's gonna be a lot of graphs, which I know you all love. And then like just a quick note on my notation. Again, I couldn't get that bar in PowerPoint, so B means bar, which means it's held constant. So we have actual expenditure and we have planned expenditure. So the difference between actual and planned expenditure is basically what it sounds like. So the actual expenditure is what households, firms, and the government spend on goods and services, and that's going to be our GDP. Planned expenditure is the amount that households, firms, and governments want to spend, or initially plan to spend, and then maybe something happened and they didn't. So we have a couple of things that might be causing a difference in planned and actual spending. So one thing that might happen is a firm might not sell everything they plan to, and they have to make an inventory investment. Or if they're going to sell more than they plan to, then we're going to see that there's going to be a decrease in inventory, which will cause a change in planned and actual expenditure. So we have these determinants of planned expenditure. So we're going to assume NX is 0. So either we're in a closed economy or everything is balanced everywhere magically. So we're only going to have consumption, investment, and government purchases. So planned expenditure is going to be the sum total of consumption, investment, and government spending, where consumption is going to be a function of income minus taxes. You'll see later on taxes are actually going to be fixed or held constant. Investment is also going to be held constant, and government spending is going to be held constant. So if we bring all of these together, we just get planned expenditure is going to be consumption as a function of income plus investment and government spending, which are held constant. So the slope of this line is going to be the marginal propensity to consume. So as income rises, how much? Consumption rises, essentially. It's an awkward sentence.
Choose taxes, right?
What?
Choose taxes.
Yeah, T is going to be taxes.
So you're not going to fluctuate our income.
No, only income tax. Only income fluctuates. Taxes are held constant in this model. Again, it's oversimplified, but sometimes that's what we need.
What about C? That doesn't fluctuate.
What?
C fluctuates, don't you, right?
Well, only with income. Because taxes, so it's, C is a function of income minus taxes. All right, so we're going to have to talk about the Keynesian cross here. So we have, so an economy is in equilibrium when planned expenditure equals actual expenditure. So why would people want to change their plans once they're realized? Maybe they realize they can afford more than they thought originally, or, well, once they're realized, so they had to have gotten to their original plan. But that would be one thing that would cause it. So we're going to remember that income, or Y equals GDP, so Y is also going to equal planned expenditure. And planned expenditure is going to be a one-to-one relationship. So if we have a one-to-one relationship, I'm going to like erase and redraw graphs a lot today, just as a warning. What we get is a line that looks like this. So Y equals PE, which granted this is up there, but I feel like sometimes it helps for me to draw things out. And that's going to be our actual expenditure, so that's what actually happens. And then we have our planned expenditure. So I think sometimes what's kind of tricky here is why do we start up here, wherever it is. Expenditure. I don't know how to spell things, it's fine. And then income. So we're all familiar with algebra. We know the equation y equals mx plus b, I hope, right? So if we kind of go back here and we look, we have a slope, which is going to be our MPC, and that's pertaining to consumption. But investment and government spending, they're fixed, so they're just y-intercept, essentially. So that's what we start with here. And then whatever our MPC is, we get the line of this planned expenditure. So this is where our equilibrium is. We have y equilibrium of income, so I star, and we have E star, or PE star, whatever you want to call it. This is going to become very important, and you'll see why, I think, in like a slide or two slides. Well, I guess we'll talk about this stuff first. So, I guess we'll talk about this first scenario. So we have planned expenditure 1, and we have Y1. So we have an unplanned inventory accumulation causes incomes to fall. So this is actual expenditure, planned expenditure. And what we're going to do is we're going to move back down until we get to our income and our equilibrium planned expenditure. If we have an unplanned drop in inventory, it's going to cause incomes to rise because remember, drop in inventory is means there's more consumption than planned. That means firms have to take from inventory to sell. So if PE1 is less than production, Y1 firms sell less than they are producing and add to inventory. So firms have to lay off workers and incomes will fall. And then, so that's all that's happening here is this first scenario. So then if PE2 is greater than production, so planned expenditure is greater than production, Y2, firms sell more than they are producing and subtract from inventory, and they're going to have to hire more workers in order to increase production, so equilibrium will rise to, so GDP will rise to equilibrium. Again, it's always trying to get back to where these two lines meet. So now we'll talk about government purchases a bit. So we all know about money multipliers. We talked about them. We talked about them in like chapter 4, but you talked about them in Econ 101. If all of a sudden the government increases purchases, we have a higher planned expenditure. So the change in government purchases will shift the entire planned expenditure line up. Because again, government spending is part of our y-intercept, so if they increase government spending, the whole line is going to go up. But the MPC hasn't changed. Nothing has changed about our marginal propensity to consume, so our slope stays constant. So this is going to be PE2. So an increase in government spending, we get to E prime, I guess, and we'll get to I prime. So it might not look like it on my graph, but this change in the increase in government spending is going to be why did I, oh, I used Y for income, right. The change in Y is gonna be greater than the change in government spending because of the money multiplier. So, I'm trying to think of a way that I could, oh, if it was a steeper MPC, I'm not gonna redraw everything. So the government purchase multiplier, change in Y over change in G, and it tells us how much Y changes with a $1 change in government purchases. So for some reason, I decided I wanted to talk about a proof. Which proof did I want to talk about? Probably this one. All right. So I'll work on it over here. So the government purchase multiplier is essentially going to be our change in Y over our change in G. And what that's going to equal is 1 plus our MPC plus our MPC squared plus our MPC cubed, and so on and so forth forever and ever. If we use an infinite geometric series, all we're going to wind up with is 1 over 1 minus the MPC, which is what we learned was our money multiplier in macro 1. Macro. So if we have a $1 change in government spending and we think our MPC is 0.6, we'll get 1 over 1 minus 0.6. We'll get 1 over 0.4, which equals 2.5. So for every $1 increase in government spending, we'll see a $2.50 increase essentially in income. All right, and then we also talk about taxes. So we have the decrease in taxes leads to an immediate increase in disposable income, which will increase our consumption. So we have MPC times the change in taxes. But we actually have a different equation, or rule, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I'm going to get rid of this. And what we wind up with is our change in Y, so our change in Y over our change in T is going to be negative the MPC over 1 minus the MPC. And the negative might look a little strange, but really all it's saying is if taxes go down, we're actually going to wind up spending more money. So do I want to explain this one? Yes. All right. So again, we'll use that same example. So if we have negative 0.6 over 1 minus 0.6, we'll get negative 0.6 over negative 0.4, no, just 0.4, and we'll get negative 1.5. So if we cut taxes $1, spending will increase by $1, or income will increase by $1.50. So we see a smaller increase in expenditure.
Wait, say that again. Yeah.
If we cut taxes by $1,
Yeah.
we'll see incomes increase by $1.50. Well, equilibrium income, not like individual income. But you know, well, I erased the graph now, but this income, like the national income. So we see a larger increase from an increase in government spending than by a decrease in taxes. All right. Now we're at the fun stuff.
So it's beneficial for them to have high budgets for defense and stuff like that. So it drives, it drives spending, it drives income.
Yes and no. There's, that economic belief that you should save when you're doing really well so that you can spend when you're not. So if things are good, then there's no reason to continue to have a high budget, because then you're not doing anything about any debt or anything of that nature. Whereas if you're not spending a lot when things are really good, then you can save, pay down things, or have a surplus, whatever it is, and then you can spend it later on. So I wouldn't say a high budget is always good. But there's a lot, to that question. There's a lot more parts. It's not just one moving part. It's, national economy. There's in the United States, there's 350 million moving parts. But yeah. Anyway. So we have the goods market and we have the investment savings curve. So we have the interest rate, investment, and the investment savings curve. So the Keynesian cross, that's the first thing we talked about. That's only our first step in all of this. So it makes this oversimplified assumption that investment is fixed. But we already talked about in chapter, I don't know what, that investment is not fixed because it's dependent on R. So if we look now to this figure 11.7, we see that the investment function slopes down. As the interest rate is lower, more investment will occur just because it's cheaper to invest. So we're going to use these two, A and B, essentially to derive the investment savings curve. So I'll talk through it first and then I'll draw it, which the drawings don't seem to help too much, but sometimes it does. I don't know. So we use the investment function first. So we're going to see an increase in the interest rate. So if there's an increase in the interest rate, we're going to stay on this investment function. We're just going to move along it. So we'll see investment changes. So we have a lower planned investment. And if we have a lower planned investment, we have to go back up to our Keynesian cross. We're going to have the entire planned expenditure shift down. Once it shifts down, we see that there's going to be a decrease in income, and we can bring all of these weird dotted lines together. So when we were at R1, we were at Y1 on planned expenditure. So we bring those down, they meet here. Then when we went to R2, we shifted down to Y2, and again, we bring those together, and we have, well, I guess that's now Y2 still, but it's now our investment savings curve. Me doing this is not very helpful, that's why I'm going to draw it again. I think that'll help. I'm getting that glazed look now, and it's, oh, I forgot I do have a watch. I wasn't wearing it for like weeks, because I thought, the Fitbit might give me cancer. I still think it might, but.
Is that such low background, so radiation, it's not like really even.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be like
Like
90 years from now,
when I
but.
was on the test sites, the radiation now, where the bombs were detonated in the 50s, is so little above background radiation, it barely makes an impact based on what you get a day.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to remember, we're gonna live to be like 300. So any radiation that starts now, it's just gonna keep building up. I don't wanna live to 250 when everyone else is living at 300. That means I missed out on 50 great years. That's of course an exaggeration, but hopefully we'll live longer than, 73, which I think is the average. Just decreased again, so it's not looking too great.
Is that like a sign of a struggling?
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
It's the Fitbits.
Huh?
It's the sign of the Fitbits.
Yeah, the Fitbits are starting to get us. All right, so I'm not going to draw these very big because I'm not tall enough to reach all the way up there. Does that help? Or is that too small?
I can see it.
That helps. All right. So we have our investment. We're going to start with the investment function. That's A. So we have our investment function. All right. We're going to have interest rate. Well, I'll just label it R. Remember, interest rate is R. And we have investment. So this is the amount of investment that we're making. So that's going to be I. And that's just a function, whatever it is. Then I'm going to be very careful about how this is drawn, because it needs to be pretty much the exact same. We have Keynesian cross. I can never spell his name. Keynesian cross. And we'll have, I'll label it down here, IS curve. So this is the thing that we are trying to derive right now. This is only half of the chapter. And we haven't derived it yet. Because we still have to derive the LM curve. But so, we have y equals PE. And we'll have whatever, we'll call this planned expenditure, PE1. And let's get everything labeled, expenditure. Oh, I think I did spell that correct before. Income, Y. So here, all right, so sometimes I know, what's difficult is what are we labeling each axes with? We bring R over, and we bring Y down. So we get the rate here, and we get the income here. And then let's see. No, we're going to derive that. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick some weird interest rate right here. This is our investment based on R1, and this is going to be R1. Something happens where our interest rate increases. And we're going to say it goes to here, R2. So investment based on R2. Because of this change in the interest rate, we're going to see a downward shift in planned expenditure. A considerable downward shift. Oh, I need this. Y1. Okay. Hold on, let me back up a second. So we had investment based on R1, and based on that, we had our original planned expenditure, and we had our output 1. We bring our output 1 down into the investment savings curve, and we bring our initial interest rate over. And wherever they meet, that's where one of our points is going to be plotted. So now we have this shift in our planned expenditure because investment decreased because the interest rate went up. So we have this huge shift, and again, we have to try to keep the same MPC, close enough, PE2, and now we have Y2. So we bring R over and Y down, and now we went from R1 to R2, and we went from Y1 to Y2. So those should connect, and this is going to be investment saving. So what we get is, I guess, as the interest rate goes up, output will go down. Does that make some sense?
Repeat that last line's investment savings.
As interest rates go up, output will go down, income will go down.
One question, not really on that specifically, but why is actual expenditure
graph called y equals PE?
Oh, so we need this. Keynes basically came up with this output equals planned expenditure. That's our equilibrium, regardless of where we're at. When y equals PE, we're at equilibrium. That's our equilibrium, where planned expenditure equals our output. So there's no overproduction, underproduction. I mean, in reality, there is overproduction, underproduction.
So for like the sake of this, we're saying that actual expenditure is the same as planned expenditure.
No. What we're saying, wait.
Because
Yeah,
I'm
'cause-
confused because at the beginning we said actual expenditure is GDP, and now we've got like Y, which is output, which is GDP, is the same as planned expenditure. So are we just saying that because it's easier to then look at all these models? Like, I don't know, I've been
You
confused
mean, are you talking about this line?
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I've been confused since you brought that up, and I've been trying to make it make sense.
So AE equals PE there.
On this line.
Yeah.
But this line is just a line that exists.
Yeah.
Always. Like, it's not like I'm trying to think of something we did in a previous chapter to make an analogy to it. Remember, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, you were asking me about always, in the long run, we always go back to Y1 or whatever. This is the line we're always trying to get back to, essentially.
Okay.
It's the same idea. We're always trying to get back to that line where our planned expenditure equals our output.
Yeah.
It's just our equilibrium line. Like here we have, well, not here.
It's like why we want it to be.
Yeah, like when we have, supply and demand, we have an equilibrium point. Here we just have a line. Same kind of idea. Does that make sense?
I mean, kind of, but
So anywhere
what if-
on the line is.
So you're saying it's basically impossible for
Yeah. That makes a lot
the for the actual planned expenditure line and the y equals PE line to not intersect, basically. But so what if like the output was greater than planned expenditure?
All right. So if we go back to here, so output is greater than planned expenditure. Output is greater than planned expenditure. So Y1 is over PE1, right? So what's going to happen is we're going to have an unplanned inventory accumulation. We produced more than is being purchased. So what's going to happen is we're going to have incomes fall. We're going to have to lay people off. We overproduced, we didn't expect this, and now incomes have to fall back to equilibrium. So this is like our snapshot equilibrium. This is not always constantly what's going on. We might overproduce, we might underproduce, but we're going to get back to equilibrium at some point. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. I mean, that does make sense to me, but I'm just confused with why it's called y equals PE, while in that case it doesn't. In the case of this, where, for example, PE1 is less than Y1, then PE does not equal Y.
No, but on this line, this 45-degree line,
Yeah.
it will equal. They will equal. That's why we have the line. That's the equilibrium we're trying to get back to. That's what Keynes was saying when this line essentially came out of his theory.
So anywhere on that line, so
Would
anywhere
be
it hits that
equilibrium.
line, it will be equal to.
Yeah, we're not always, like, you can see we're not always there. We're not always hitting that point on the line that we
Yeah.
need to, but the economy will go back to that line. Something's gonna adjust for us to get back to that cross, where they cross over. Does that kind of make sense?
Then maybe really dumb question, but why are the lines not exactly the same? Like what causes the y equals PE line to be at the 45-degree angle and the PE line to be at a different angle?
So the y equals PE line is just where output equals planned expenditure. So if our output is 0, our planned expenditure is 0. If our output is 1, then our planned expenditure is 1. It's just that equilibrium that we want to get to where we don't have excess or a deficit of what we need, whereas this PE is the scenario that we're actually facing. Whereas this represents our equilibrium, this represents what we're actually doing. And the slopes are different because this is our marginal propensity to consume, and this is just a slope of 1. It's just a one-to-one relationship.
Something just clicked.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. All right. Okay. So I'm not going to redraw all of this stuff because of this example. We're just going to talk about it. So the IS curve shows that for any given interest rate, the level of income that brings the good and market into equilibrium, which also will depend on G and T. And then I think this was a note to myself, just to remember so I could snap a picture of this and put it in. So the first thing we're going to have here is an increase in government purchases, shift planned expenditure upwards. All right, that's easy enough. And that's going to raise our income, or output, by the change in government spending divided by 1 minus the MPC. That was a proof that we talked about, well, vaguely a proof that we talked about, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago. So once that happens, we have the entire investment savings curve shift to the right. Okay? And it will shift by the same amount of the change in Y. All right. Oh, this is just another quote I took. Oh, like, where did I find this? So the investment saving curve shows the combinations of the interest rate and the level of income that are consistent with equilibrium in the market for goods and services. So the IS curve is drawn for a given fiscal policy. So if fiscal policy changes, we're going to have to change the IS curve. And then, a couple of examples there. So a change in fiscal policy that raises the demand for goods and services shifts the IS curve to the right. And then a change in fiscal policy that will reduce the demand for goods and services will shift the IS curve to the left. So if the government wants to spend more, we have to shift everything to the right. If the government wants to spend less, we have to shift everything to the left. Well, right, not left. It's backwards for me and you guys. All right. Now we have the money market and the LM curve. So this is the theory of liquidity preference, essentially. So the theory of liquidity preference is interest rates adjust to balance the supply and demand for the economy's most liquid assets, which is essentially just cash. That is our most liquid asset. And then, we have like T-bills, which are pretty liquid. But anyway, so if M is the supply of money and P is the price level, then M divided by P is the supply of real money balances, which is going to be fixed. So M over P, so money supply over price level supplied, equals MB, so M bar, so a fixed money supply over fixed prices. So M is an exogenous policy variable, so it's just something, it's given to us, we take it, and we're like, all right, that's what we're going with. We're also going to assume that prices are exogenous and fixed, since the ISLM is a short run theory. It's not for long run, so prices aren't going to change. They are what they are. So if we plot real money balances against interest rate, it's a vertical line since it's not dependent on interest rates based on what we just found here. All right, now I'm going to have to erase all this. I wonder if I brought water. Just thinking ahead. Do I still have you all? You're faded?
You're like 10 minutes.
Yeah? Let's see. Hold on. Some of you are some slides behind. Paul, Luke. Gotta keep up here. That's new. I've never seen that before.
What? I'm on that slide.
No, it tells me you're on this one. It doesn't matter. I'm just.
Check you.
I'm
No,
on,
I believe you. I've just never seen this
textbook.
before. It's new.
I think that thing has been on.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe.
I mean, maybe you couldn't see it on there, but like when you click on the slide, you should be able to see.
All right. Let's see. How long? All right. Let's see what we can do. All right. So we went over that. So when interest rates rise, individuals want to hold less of their wealth in the form of cash. We talked about this like weeks ago. Interest rates are higher, people would rather hold their money in a way where they're going to earn interest. So M over P demanded equals L, which is dependent on R. Again, I made this note to myself and didn't get rid of the note to myself. So where the function L shows the quantity of money demanded. We use L again because it's cash is our most liquid asset. And that is going to be dependent on R. So the supply and the demand for money is what's going to determine the interest rate. We said that the supply here is going to be fixed. As all that stuff adjusts, we got new interest rates. So how does the interest rate get into equilibrium? So people will adjust their portfolios. So if interest rates are high, the quantity of real money balances exceeds the quantity demanded. So individuals try to convert their cash into interest-bearing assets, which will eventually lower the interest rate. So, I mean, this makes sense. If you're going to earn a lot of money on your savings, you're going to save a lot of money, but now because there's more money to be lent out, interest rates have to go down, because now it's not as much of a competition to get the money. And then we can all rationalize the opposite scenario. So if interest rates are really low, people are going to be like, oh, well, I'll just borrow money or I won't save money. And now all of a sudden, the amount of money is going to tighten up kind of, and interest rates will have to rise again to get back to that equilibrium. Make sense? All right. So, maybe I don't even have to draw this one. This one's kind of self-explanatory. So we have our money demand curve, we have our money supply curve, and the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to have a fall in the money supply. So maybe the Fed made some change and money supply changes. So once that happens, we're now at money supply 2 over prices, interest rates are going to rise. There's just less cash in the system, and we're going to have to get back to that equilibrium. Notice here, it's a shift in the supply, but it's a movement in the demand. All right. So, from this, we can derive our LM curve, which actually isn't as time-consuming as the IS curve. So, the level of income is going to affect the demand for money. If people earn more, they're going to want more money. So the quantity of real money balances is negatively related to the interest rate and positively related to income. So now we don't just have the demand dependent on rates, we also have the demand dependent on income. So an increase in income is going to raise the increase of the demand of money. So this is going to be now a shift in demand, not a shift in money supply. So we go from Y1 to Y2, our income is increased and our interest rate is increased. So, why didn't I delete any of these notes?
Just to clarify, what does L stand for again?
Liquidity, money, essentially. Just because cash is our most liquid asset, we're going to use L instead of C. But I think L and C's look pretty similar anyway. And cash is not a formal term. Money would be the formal term, but so the LM curve is essentially just so on the one hand, we're going to have L dependent on R and Y, and we're going to have our money supply or real money balances, so M bar over P bar, L1, R. All right, so if we're at R1, now all of a sudden there's an increase in income, so this shifts. We're going to move to R2, but now income has gone from Y1 to Y2, and we've gone from R1 to now R2. And that's where we're going to get our LM curve. And again, we have interest rate, which is R, and income. That's essentially how we derive that, if that makes sense so far to everybody.
That second point is R2, right?
Yeah, sorry. I feel like as you guys are feeding, I should be more specific with my graphing, but obviously I've gotten far less specific. All right. So one thing that'll occur here is, so if we go back to well, I guess it doesn't matter so much, but if we go back to this IS curve, it'll shift with changes in fiscal policy and whatnot. As we get to this curve, it will shift for a given money supply, so that's monetary policies. So if the Fed reduces the money supply, we're going to have M over P shift to the left, and once it shifts to the left, the interest rate rises, but we're also going to have our demand curve, well, the LM curve, not the demand curve, shift upwards. And so for Y, which is held constant, we're going to have an increase in the interest rate because the money supply has decreased. All right. We're at the conclusion. I see some bloodshot eyes, but we're almost there. So we have income, Y, equals consumption, which is a function of income minus taxes, plus the interest investment, which is dependent on the rate, plus government spending. That is our investment savings curve. And M over P equals essentially the liquidity function dependent on our rate and our income, which is our LM curve. So these can all be brought into the same graph because the investment savings curve was derived with rate on the y-axis and income on the x-axis, and so is our LM curve. So we can bring them all together. That's supposed to be LM. So what this model does essentially is just, it determines short-run fluctuations in the economy. But we have to do a lot of work to get there. I saw that, high roll. And then the case study. There's a lot of case studies in here that I've seemed to, not seemed to, but I've skipped over with you guys. Originally I was thinking of using them as assignments, and I think that might be what I'm doing with these ones, because you all have access to them, which is slightly different than last year, because last year no one had access to the case studies. Well, they did, but no one did as much Googling as you guys did.
You mean the textbook?
That's what I meant. But they're all in the textbook. That's the thing. So both of these case studies are not in the. Oh, this is only one. There's only one case study. So essentially, what I want you to do is read this case study. In my book, it's on page 330. I don't know what it is on the online textbook, but I want you to read that and basically kind of answer the question, give your analysis, give some feedback on it. Next week, what we'll probably do is, again, I'll take questions on this chapter because I know there are probably going to be questions. We'll look at chapter 12, we're going to go over chapter 12, which is aggregate demand 2, applying the ISLM model. So we just built it. Next, we're going to apply it. And then from there, that's only the first week of April. So then we're going to have some other stuff to do, but that pretty much brings us through this textbook. Next week might be split up into, next chapter might be split up into 2 weeks, but we'll see how that goes. But for now, that's it. I decided I would prefer if these are printed, not emailed, because then that means I have to print them and I don't have a printer. Which I didn't think about when I first said I don't care what you guys do, but now I decided I do care. That's kind of it.
Sweet.